If the transfer impact assessment shows that the country doesn't offer an adequate level of protection, then you have to assess whether you can put in place some additional supplemental measures. If you find that you can't put in place additional supplemental measures to create that equivalency, then basically you can't carry on doing the transfers. So what are these supplemental measures that we can put in place? Essentially, there are three types of measures. There's technical, contractual, and organizational measures. And a combination of all three of these may be needed. And the EDP guidance sets out in quite a lot of detail what they see as a number of examples of each of these areas. And I'll just touch on a couple of them. But the main point is that the main supplemental measure that they focus on are the technical measures. This is the one that they see as being the key. And the other two, the contractual and the organizational methods, are supporting. On the technical side, the main thing here is that the data will meet the requirement for supplemental measures if it's either encrypted or pseudonymized. Now, in terms of the encryption and pseudonymization, to be effective as a supplemental measure, the EDPB say that the data importer, the recipient of the data, cannot have access to the encryption key or the other data that would be needed to unlock the pseudonymized data. So that might be fine if you're just hosting data remotely or backing up data and there's no need for the service provider to access that data. But it's much more problematic if you're sharing data, for example, with a parent company, or you're using a SaaS service where data is being hosted as well, where the provider actually needs to have access to the data in a clear form. And the EDPB make it clear that in that scenario, it won't be satisfactory. Worryingly, they also give the example of where an EU subsidiary shares HR data with its parent company in a jurisdiction such as the US, where public authorities can access that data beyond, as they say, what is necessary and proportionate in a democratic society. And this is a very common scenario, of course, for international groups. And the EDPB conclude that that's not an effective technical measure where the recipient in the US, for example, has access to the data in clear form. So in such cases, it will be probably necessary to do what you can in terms of technical measures, encryption in transit, for example, but also to layer on additional contractual and organizational measures. So in relation to contractual measures, well, we already have the standard contractual clauses, which I'm going to come on to in a second, and they're already quite detailed. But what we're talking about here is SCCs plus, if you like, adding a number of additional provisions to the contractual clauses to give them a bit more oomph. So, for example, that might be enhanced audit rights, or the EDPB give the example of what they call a warrant canary, which for some service providers would involve them publishing at least every 24 hours a cryptographically signed message to confirm that they've not received an order from the government or a police or an enforcement authority to disclose personal data. A little bit paranoid perhaps, but that's one of the measures that they refer to. And organizational measures as well. This is really a bit like the GDPR accountability principle. So bringing in a lot of internal policies within the data importer organization, perhaps under which they commit not to release voluntarily data to government authorities unless they're under a legal obligation to, and also perhaps being backed up by things like training programs and other policies. So there's quite a lot to think about there, and data exporters from the EU and the UK have to proceed with caution, document the assessment thoroughly as Ben has described, and they will be accountable for the decisions that are taken here in line with the accountability principle. The EDPB say that if, having done all this assessment and put in place such supplemental measures as you can, you still think there isn't there's a lack of essential equivalence, which is what we're looking for, then, and you go ahead anyway with the transfers, then you have to notify the supervisory authority. So in the UK, that would be the ICO. So quite a lot of work to do there on impact assessments and supplemental provisions.